The massive space station called Nexus Prime hung in the void between star systems like a giant metal flower. Its twisted metal arms stretched out in all directions, each one the size of a small moon. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked at its ports every day, but today was different. Today, the most important trial in galactic history was about to begin. Commander Jake Murphy stood at the viewing window of his small transport ship and watched the station grow larger as they approached. His hands were sweaty inside his uniform gloves, and his heart beat faster than usual. Behind him, diplomat Lisa Carter checked her notes for the 100th time, while scientist Dr. Ben Rodriguez stared at his tablet with worried eyes. They all knew what was at stake. The entire human race was on trial, and if they lost, Earth would be cut off from the rest of the galaxy forever. The docking procedure took an hour, but it felt like days. Jake could see other ships arriving from every direction. The long, needle-shaped vessels of the Vexi Empire gleamed like silver knives in the starlight. The floating crystal spheres of the luminals pulsed with soft blue light as they moved through space without any visible engines. Even the mechanical cube ships of the Construct Collective were there, their dark surfaces covered with blinking lights that looked like electronic eyes. When their ship finally docked, Jake led his small team through the airlock and into the station. The corridor beyond was enormous, with a ceiling so high that clouds had formed near the top. The walls were made of some kind of metal that changed colors as they walked past, shifting from deep blue to silver to gold. Other beings moved through the corridor alongside them, and Jake tried not to stare at the strange creatures he had only seen in pictures before. A group of tall, insect-like beings walked past, their forearms moving in perfect rhythm as they talked to each other in clicking sounds. Their skin looked like polished green metal, and their large compound eyes seemed to look in all directions at once. These were the Zephyrians, Jake knew, the oldest and most respected judges in the galaxy. One of them would be deciding humanity's fate today. Further down the corridor, Jake saw a creature that looked like it was made of living light. The luminal floated a few inches off the ground, its body shifting between different shades of blue and white like a ghost made of stars. It moved without making any sound, and when it passed by, Jake felt a strange tingling sensation on his skin. The courtroom was even more impressive than the corridors. It was a perfect sphere with no up or down that Jake could identify. Seats floated in the air at different levels, arranged in circles around a central platform where the judges would sit. The walls were transparent, showing the stars beyond, and Jake could see Earth's sun as a tiny yellow dot in the distance. Jake and his team found their assigned seats near the bottom of the sphere. Around them, representatives from dozens of different species took their places. Jake recognized some of them from the files he had studied. The Vexi delegation sat in a group of sharp, angular chairs that looked like they were made of the same crystal as their bodies. Their leader, Prosecutor Veltar, was a tall being with skin that looked like green glass and eyes that glowed with cold white light. Across from them sat the witnesses, who would testify against humanity. Jake's stomach twisted as he saw how many there were. The furry, bear-like Korani who claimed humans had destroyed one of their trading posts. The blue-skinned Aquarans who said human mining operations had poisoned 3 of their water worlds. The mechanical representatives of the Construct Collective who accused humans of stealing their technology, but it was the judges who commanded everyone's attention when they finally entered the courtroom. 7 beings floated to the central platform, each one different from the others. The lead judge was Judge Kethver, a Zephyrian whose green metallic skin was marked with intricate patterns that showed his age and wisdom. His forearms moved gracefully as he settled into his floating chair, and his compound eyes reflected the light from the stars beyond the walls. Judge Kethver's voice filled the courtroom when he spoke, even though Jake couldn't see any speakers anywhere. The judge's words were translated automatically into every language, and Jake heard them in perfect English inside his head. "We are here today to decide the fate of the species known as humans," Judge Kethver said. His voice was deep and resonated, like the sound of metal being struck. They stand accused of violating the Cosmic Preservation Act through the development of weapons of mass destruction, aggressive expansion into space, and threatening the peace and safety of established galactic civilizations. Prosecutor Veltar stood up, his crystal body catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns across the courtroom. "Honored judges," he said, his voice like wind chimes in a storm, "the evidence against humanity is overwhelming. They are a violent, unpredictable species that has no place among civilized beings. In just a few centuries, they have gone from primitive cave dwellers to a spacefaring race capable of destroying entire worlds. They have created weapons that can kill billions, and they have used these weapons against their own kind." The prosecutor waved his hand, and holographic images appeared in the air above the platform. Jake watched with growing horror as scenes from Earth's history played out for all to see. Wars, explosions, cities burning, people running in terror. The images were real, taken from human broadcasts and surveillance satellites, but they showed only the worst moments of human civilization. "Look at their history," Veltar continued. "War after war, destruction after destruction. They have poisoned their own world with industrial waste, driven countless species to extinction, and now they bring this same destructive nature to the stars. Already they have established colonies on 17 worlds, stripping resources and building weapons factories. How long before they turn these weapons against us?" Jake felt his face burning with shame and anger as he watched the images. Everything the prosecutor said was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Humans had also created beautiful art, amazing music, incredible literature. They had cured diseases, explored the deepest oceans and highest mountains, and reached for the stars with courage and determination that impressed even their critics. When it was Jake's turn to speak, he stood up slowly and looked around the courtroom. Hundreds of alien eyes stared back at him, most of them filled with suspicion or fear. He cleared his throat and began to speak, knowing that the words he said next might determine whether humanity had a future among the stars. "Honored judges," Jake said, his voice steady despite his nervousness, "everything the prosecutor has shown you is true. Humans have made mistakes, terrible mistakes. We have fought wars and created weapons, and sometimes we have hurt others when we meant to help, but that is not all we are." Jake gestured, and his own holographic images appeared. Children playing in parks, scientists working in laboratories, artists creating beautiful paintings, musicians playing in great concert halls. We are also a species that creates, that explores, that asks questions, and seeks answers. Yes, we have weapons, but we also have medicine that can heal any injury. Yes, we have fought wars, but we have also made peace and learned to work together despite our differences. As Jake continued his defense, he noticed a small figure sitting in the observer section. It was a young human girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old, with brown hair and serious dark eyes. She wore a simple blue dress and sat very still, watching the proceedings with the kind of attention that made Jake think she understood everything that was being said. He wondered who she was and why she was there, but he had more important things to worry about right now. The trial continued for hours, with witness after witness testifying about human aggression and unpredictability. The Korani delegate told the story of a human mining crew that had accidentally triggered an avalanche on one of their worlds, destroying a city. The Aquarian representative spoke about chemical spills from human factories that had killed millions of fish in their sacred breeding pools. Each story added another weight to the scale of evidence against humanity. Jake did his best to counter each accusation, explaining the circumstances and showing evidence of human efforts to make amends. But he could see in the judges' faces that they were not convinced. The fear in their eyes grew stronger with each piece of evidence, and Jake began to realize that this trial might already be lost. Then, just as Prosecutor Veltar was beginning his closing arguments, the young girl in the observer section stood up. The courtroom fell silent as all eyes turned to her. She was so small compared to the massive alien beings around her that she looked like a child's toy that had come to life. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her size. "I have something to say." Judge Cuthbert's mandibles clicked together in what Jake had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of a frown. "This is a formal legal proceeding," the judge said. "Observers are not permitted to speak unless they are called as witnesses." The girl looked directly at Judge Cuthbert, and Jake saw something in her eyes that made him shiver. It was an old look, too old for someone her age, as if she had seen things that no child should ever see. "I can read your mind," the girl said simply. Judge Cuthbert's compound eyes widened, and a sound like laughter came from his throat. The girl remained standing as Judge Cuthbert's laughter echoed through the spherical courtroom. Her name was Katie Brooks, though no one in the courtroom knew that yet. She had been sitting quietly for hours, listening to the accusations against her species, waiting for the right moment to act. Now that moment had come. "You think I cannot read your mind because humans are not supposed to have telepathic abilities?" Katie said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "But you are wrong about what I can do, and you are wrong about why I can do it." Judge Cuthbert leaned forward in his floating chair, his forearms crossing in front of his chest. His compound eyes studied the small human girl with the kind of attention usually reserved for dangerous criminals or fascinating scientific specimens. Around the courtroom, other beings whispered to each other in languages that sounded like music, static, or whined through metal pipes. "Very well, child," the judge said, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for official court business. "If you truly believe you can read minds, then prove it. Tell me something that only I know, something that no human could possibly have learned through normal means." Katie closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, they seemed darker than before, as if shadows had gathered behind them. She began to speak in a voice that was still young and clear, but somehow carried more weight than it should have. "Your private chambers are on the 73rd level of this station," she said. "The walls are painted the same blue as the sky. On your homeworld, and you keep a collection of memory crystals on a shelf made from the wood of a singing tree. There are 47 crystals in total, each one containing the recorded thoughts and experiences of your ancestors." Judge Cuthbert's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound that other Zephyrians recognized as surprise. But Katie continued before he could speak. "The crystal in the center of the collection belonged to your great-grandmother, who was the first of your family to become a judge. She died during the plague that swept through your world 3 centuries ago, but not before she recorded her final thoughts about justice and mercy. You listen to her words every night before you sleep, and sometimes you dream that you are back in her garden, learning about the law while she tends to her flowers." The clicking of the judge's mandibles stopped abruptly. Around the courtroom, the whispers grew louder as beings tried to understand how a human child could know such personal details about one of the most respected judges in the galaxy, Dr. Ben Rodriguez was frantically running scans with his handheld devices, checking for any kind of telepathic energy signatures that might explain what was happening. "That is impossible," said one of the other judges, a floating sphere of light that spoke in tones like crystalline bells. "Humans do not possess the biological structures necessary for telepathy. Their brains are too primitive, their neural networks too simple." Katie turned to look at the light being. "Your name is not really Luminous Seventh Echo like you tell others," she said calmly. "Your true name is something that translates to the quiet song of starlight on water. And you chose your current name because you were afraid others would think your real name was too beautiful for a judge to have." The sphere of light pulsed brighter for a moment, then dimmed to almost nothing. Other beings in the courtroom began to shift nervously in their seats as they realized that this small, human girl might actually be able to access their private thoughts. Judge Cuthbert held up one of his 4 hands for silence. "Continue," he said to Katie, though his voice now carried a note of uncertainty that had not been there before. "Tell me more." Katie's expression grew sadder as she looked at the great judge. "You have a brother named Zektar who is younger than you by 2 decades. He wanted to be a judge too, but he failed the examination 3 times because he was too emotional, too quick to anger. You helped him find work as a security officer instead, but he was killed during a riot on the mining world of Kepler 7. The judge's compound eyes reflected the starlight from beyond the transparent walls, but Katie was not finished. You blame yourself for his death because you were the one who recommended him for that assignment. You thought the work would be safe and simple, but you were wrong. The miners were angry about working conditions, and when they started to riot, your brother tried to stop them peacefully instead of using force. They killed him for his kindness, and you have carried the guilt of that decision for 43 years. Judge Kethver was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. How do you know these things? No human has ever been to my homeworld. No human has access to our historical records or personal files. Most importantly, I have never spoken of my brother's death to anyone, not even my closest colleagues. Katie wiped a tear from her cheek. I know, because your thoughts are not hidden from me, even though you believe they should be, but it is not just your thoughts I can see. I can see the thoughts of everyone in this courtroom. She turned to face Prosecutor Veltar, whose crystal body had gone completely transparent with shock. You made a deal with the Coalition of Seven Systems before this trial even began, she said. They promised you control of 3 human colonies in exchange for ensuring that humanity would be found guilty. You have already prepared false evidence and bribed 2 of the smaller judges with rare minerals from your homeworld. Veltar's body flashed bright red, then went dark. These are lies, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The child is making wild accusations to save her species. Katie continued as if he had not spoken. The Coalition plans to invade Earth regardless of what this court decides. They want the planet for its water and its position near several important trade routes. This trial is just a way to make their invasion look legal instead of what it really is, which is genocide. The courtroom erupted into chaos as representatives from different species began shouting at each other in dozens of languages. Some demanded that Katie be removed from the courtroom, while others insisted that her accusations be investigated immediately. Judge Kethver struck his gavel against the floating platform, and the sound rang out like a great bell, cutting through the noise. Silence, he commanded, and his voice carried the authority of centuries of legal experience. The court will hear what this witness has to say. Katie looked around the courtroom, and her young face showed a mixture of sadness and determination. I can tell you things about every being in this room, she said. I can tell you about the Aquaran delegate who secretly hopes that humans will be allowed to join the galactic community, because his daughter is dying of a disease that only human medicine can cure. I can tell you about the Construct Collective representative who is not really a machine at all, but the uploaded consciousness of a being who died 1,000 years ago and is afraid that others will discover his true nature. She pointed to different sections of the courtroom as she spoke, and each time she did, the beings she indicated seemed to shrink back in their seats. I can tell you about the judge from the Spiral Arm Coalition who has been taking bribes for 2 centuries, or the witness from the Korani who is lying about the damage caused by human mining because her government wants to claim insurance money from the Galactic Protection Fund. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from his scanning devices with confusion written all over his face. Commander Murphy, he whispered urgently to Jake, I am not detecting any telepathic energy from her at all. According to these readings, she is completely normal, just a regular human child with no unusual brain activity whatsoever. Jake stared at Katie with growing amazement and concern. If she was not telepathic, then how was she doing what she was doing? And more importantly, what would happen when the other species realized that humanity might be capable of things they had never imagined possible? Judge Kethver leaned back in his chair, all 4 of his arms now hanging loosely at his sides. Child, he said slowly, I have been a judge for over 300 years. I have presided over trials involving every known species in the galaxy. I have seen technological marvels that can reshape matter at the atomic level, and I have witnessed mental abilities that can influence the thoughts of entire populations, but I have never seen anything like what you are doing. Katie nodded solemnly. That is because what I am doing is not telepathy, Judge Kethver. It is something different, something that your science does not understand yet. But you want to understand it, do you not? You want to know how a human child can see into the minds of beings who are supposed to be telepathically protected by centuries of mental training and technological enhancement. The judge's mandibles clicked slowly as he considered her words. Yes, he admitted, I do want to know. But I also fear what the answer might mean for the galaxy. Katie smiled for the first time since she had stood up, but it was not a happy smile. You are wise to be afraid, honored judge. Because what I'm going to show you next will change everything you think you know about humanity, about this trial, and about the future of every species in this courtroom. She closed her eyes again, and this time when she opened them, they seemed to glow with a light that came from somewhere deep inside her. You want to know your darkest secret, Judge Kethver? The one you have hidden. Judge Kethver stared at Katie Brooks for what felt like an eternity. The courtroom had fallen completely silent except for the soft humming of the station's life support systems. Even the most advanced beings in the galaxy held their breath as they waited to see what would happen next. I need to understand how you are doing this, the judge said finally. His voice was different now, more curious than authoritative. Will you submit to a deeper mental probe? I want to see not just what you know, but how you know it. Katie's expression grew troubled. Are you sure, honored judge? Once I show you the true depth of what I can see, you might wish you had never asked. Some knowledge is dangerous, and some truths are too heavy for even the wisest minds to carry. The other judges exchanged glances with each other. Judge Velanara, a being that looked like a tree made of silver metal, spoke in a voice like wind through leaves. The child is clearly using some form of advanced technology. No biological entity can access protected thoughts without generating detectable energy signatures. This is impossible. Then let us discover what makes the impossible possible, Judge. Kethver replied. He gestured with one of his 4 hands, and a small device rose from the platform between them. It looked like a sphere made of flowing liquid metal, and it pulsed with soft blue light. This is a standard telepathic monitoring device. It will allow me to observe your thought patterns while you demonstrate your abilities. Are you willing? Katie nodded slowly, though her young face showed reluctance. I am willing. But I want everyone in this courtroom to understand that what you are about to learn will change how you see not just humans, but everything you think you know about the galaxy itself. Dr. Rodriguez was frantically taking readings with his equipment, trying to understand what was happening. Commander, he whispered to Jake, her brain activity is completely normal. Whatever she is doing, it is not showing up on any of our sensors. According to every test I can run, she is just a regular 12-year-old human girl. Jake watched with growing amazement as Katie placed her small hand on the telepathic monitoring device. The metal sphere began to glow brighter, and holographic displays appeared in the air around it, showing brainwave patterns and neural activity, maps that meant nothing to him but clearly fascinated the alien scientists in the courtroom. Katie closed her eyes and concentrated. When she began to speak, her voice took on that same strange quality it had before, as if it was coming from somewhere deeper than her throat. Judge Kethver, you are thinking about your first day as a judge. She said, you were nervous because the case involved a dispute between 2 species that had been at war for centuries. You were afraid you would make the wrong decision and cause more bloodshed. But that is not what you are really thinking about. You are thinking about the secret files you found in the archives 6 months ago. The judge's compound eyes widened, and the patterns on his metallic skin began to shift and change color. Around the courtroom, other beings noticed his reaction and leaned forward to hear better. Katie continued, her voice growing stronger. The files contained genetic analysis reports and archaeological survey data from 47 different worlds. The data showed something that terrified you so much that you have not slept properly since you discovered it. You found evidence that humanity is not what they appear to be. Stop, whispered Judge Kethver, but his voice was weak and Katie did not stop. The files showed that human genetic material contained sequences that match samples found in ruins across the galaxy, she said. Ruins that are millions of years old, left behind by a civilization that your people call the Shapers. The beings who ruled the galaxy long before any of the current species evolved to intelligence. A sound like breaking glass came from the section where the Construct Collective representatives sat. Their mechanical forms began to vibrate with frequencies that hurt the ears of organic beings. Prosecutor Veltar-S crystal body had gone completely dark, and Judge Velinara-S silver branches were swaying as if blown by a strong wind. Katie opened her eyes and looked directly at Judge Kethver. You know what this means, do you not? Humans are not a young species that happen to develop space travel quickly. They are the descendants of the most advanced civilization that ever existed. The Shapers did not disappear millions of years ago. They went to sleep. This is impossible, said the luminous sphere judge, but its light was dim and flickering. The Shapers were legends, myths created by primitive civilizations to explain things they could not understand. There is no scientific evidence that they ever existed. Katie turned to face the sphere of light. There is evidence, she said calmly. 47 worlds worth of evidence, carefully hidden in classified archives that only the highest-ranking judges are allowed to access. Archaeological sites with technology so advanced that current science cannot even understand how it works. Genetic samples that show biological capabilities far beyond anything that exists today. And most importantly, predictions. She gestured, and suddenly holographic images filled the air above the courtroom. Ancient symbols and mathematical equations floated like ghosts made of light, rotating slowly so everyone could see them clearly. The symbols were beautiful and terrifying at the same time, containing geometric patterns that seemed to twist space itself. The Shapers left behind predictions about their return, Katie said. They knew that their descendants would eventually develop space travel and begin to explore the galaxy again. They knew that when this happened, the younger species would be afraid and would try to stop them. They predicted this trial, Judge Kethver. They predicted you. The great judge's mandibles were clicking so rapidly that they sounded like a machine gun firing. How do you know these things? He whispered. The files I found were classified at the highest levels. Even other judges do not know they exist. I have told no one about them, not even my closest advisors. Katie smiled sadly. I know because I can see more than just thoughts, honored judge. I can see the connections between thoughts, the patterns that link past and future, the threads of possibility that weave through time itself. What you call telepathy is actually something much more dangerous. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from his scanning equipment with terror in his eyes. Commander Murphy, he said urgently, I am picking up some kind of energy signature now, but it is not telepathic. It is something else, something I have never seen before. The readings are off the charts. Jake stared at the holographic displays floating above Katie's head. The symbols were moving now, rearranging themselves into new patterns. That hurt to look at directly. What are those? He asked. Probability equations, Katie replied without turning around. Mathematical descriptions of possible futures written in a language that can manipulate reality at the quantum level. The Shapers did not just predict the future, they could choose which future would become real. She turned back to Judge Kethver. And now there was something ancient in her young eyes, something that made him lean back in his floating chair. You want to know your darkest secret, honored judge? It is not that you discovered evidence of the Shapers. It is that you have always known what you would find, because part of you remembers when they ruled the galaxy. The judge's voice was barely audible when he spoke. What are you saying? I'm saying that every intelligent species in this galaxy carries genetic traces of Shaper influence, Katie said. They did not just rule through technology and power. They shaped the evolution of life itself, guiding the development of species that would serve specific purposes in their grand design. The Zephyrians were created to be judges and administrators. The Vexhi were designed to be builders and architects. The Luminals were meant to be explorers and scouts. Around the courtroom, beings began to make sounds of distress as they realized what she was suggesting. The idea that their entire civilization had been planned and controlled by an ancient race was too horrible to accept. But humans, Katie continued, were never meant to be servants. Humans are the direct descendants of the Shapers themselves. When they decided to go into hibernation millions of years ago, they altered their own genetics to allow them to survive in a primitive state until the galaxy was ready for their return. Judge Cuthbert's forearms were trembling as he asked the question that everyone in the courtroom was thinking. Are you saying that humanity is waking up from this hibernation? Katie nodded slowly. I'm saying that the process has already begun. The environmental pressures that Earth faced during human development, the constant threats and challenges that other species see as evidence of human violence, were actually triggering mechanisms designed to activate dormant genetic sequences. Each crisis, each war, each disaster brought humanity one step closer to remembering what they really are. She gestured to herself. My abilities are just the beginning. As more humans spread across the galaxy and face new challenges, more of their Shaper heritage will activate. The species that you fear for their weapons and aggression are actually developing the power to reshape reality itself. The courtroom erupted into chaos as beings from every species began shouting at once. Some demanded that Katie be arrested immediately, while others insisted that humanity be destroyed before they could fully awaken. The silence that followed Katie's words was deeper than the void between stars. Every being in the courtroom stared at the small human girl who had just claimed that her species were the descendants of gods. Judge Cuthbert's compound eyes reflected, the starlight streaming through the transparent walls, but he was not looking at the stars. He was looking at Katie as if she was the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. You speak of the Shapers as if they were real, he said carefully. But even if we accept that possibility, how do we know that you are telling the truth about human origins? You could be lying to save your species from judgment. Katie looked around the courtroom at all the frightened faces staring back at her. I understand why you would think that, honored judge. But I am not lying and I can prove it. However, once I show you the proof, there will be no going back. The truth about humanity will change everything, and some of you may wish you had never learned it. Prosecutor Veltar's crystal body flashed bright red as he stood up. This is clearly a desperate attempt to avoid justice, he said, his voice like wind chimes in a storm. The child is making wild claims about ancient civilizations and genetic inheritance to distract us from the real issue, which is that humans are dangerous and must be stopped before they destroy galactic civilization. Then, let me demonstrate, Katie said quietly. She closed her eyes and placed both hands on the telepathic monitoring device. The metal sphere began to glow so brightly that many beings had to shield their visual organs. The holographic displays around it started showing energy patterns that Dr. Rodriguez had never seen before, readings that made no sense according to current scientific understanding. When Katie opened her eyes again, they seemed to contain depths that had not been there before, as if someone much older and wiser was looking out through them. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies beyond normal hearing. I am going to show you something that no living being has seen for 3 million years, she said. I am going to show you a memory from the time of the Shapers. The air above the courtroom began to shimmer and twist, and suddenly everyone was no longer sitting in a space station. They were standing on the surface of a world that looked like paradise. The sky was deep purple, filled with 3 moons that glowed with soft silver light. Cities stretched to the horizon, but they were unlike anything that current civilization had built. The buildings flowed like living things, their surfaces covered with patterns that moved and changed as they watched. Beings walked through the streets of this ancient city, and they looked like humans, but not quite. They were taller and more graceful, with eyes that held starlight and skin that seemed to glow with inner fire. As the courtroom watched in amazement, these ancient humans moved through their city with the casual confidence of beings who could reshape matter with a thought. This is Earth, Katie's voice said from somewhere in the vision. 3 million years ago, when the Shapers ruled not just this world but the entire galaxy, Watch and understand what your ancestors served. The vision shifted, showing vast ships that sailed between stars without any visible engines, carried by forces that bent space itself. Worlds transformed from barren rock to garden paradises in days. Suns moved in their courses to better warm the planets that orbited them. Life itself was guided and shaped according to plans that spanned millions of years. The Shapers did not rule through force or fear, Katie continued. They ruled because they could do things that seemed like magic to younger species. They could see all possible futures and choose which ones would become real. They could manipulate matter and energy at levels that current science considers impossible. Most importantly, they could guide evolution itself, creating new forms of life designed for specific purposes. The vision changed again, showing the evolutionary laboratories where the Shapers had created the ancestors of the current galactic species. Zephyrions being designed as perfect administrators, their forearms and compound eyes giving them the ability to handle multiple tasks simultaneously. Vexi being shaped as master builders, their crystal bodies allowing them to work with materials that would kill organic beings. Luminals being crafted as explorers, able to travel through space without ships and survive in environments that would destroy normal life. Judge Kethfer made a sound like breaking metal as he watched his species being created in ancient laboratories. Around the courtroom, other beings were experiencing similar shock as they saw their own origins revealed. They had believed they had evolved naturally, but now they discovered they were artificial creations designed to serve purposes they had never understood. "Why?" whispered Judge Velinara, her silver branches trembling. "Why did they create us only to abandon us?" The vision shifted one final time, showing a great council of Shapers gathered in a chamber that existed partially outside normal space. They were discussing something urgent, their faces filled with concern and sadness. "They did not abandon you," Katie said, her voice now carrying the weight of ages. They saw something coming, a threat from beyond the galaxy that would arrive in the distant future. A force so powerful that even the Shapers could not face it at their current level of development. So they made a choice that required the greatest sacrifice any civilization has ever made. The ancient Shapers in the vision began to glow with inner light as they activated devices that looked like crystalline flowers. One by one, they lay down on platforms that surrounded them with energy fields, and their bodies began to change. Their advanced forms dissolved and reformed into something simpler, more primitive. They chose to devolve themselves, Katie explained, to give up their godlike powers and become simple, primitive humans who would have to struggle and fight and suffer for millions of years. They scattered themselves across Earth and erased their own memories, knowing that only through hardship and challenge would they develop the strength necessary to face what was coming. Dr. Rodriguez was staring at his scanner readings with disbelief. "The energy signatures," he whispered to Commander Murphy. "They matched the readings from the most ancient archaeological sites in human space. This is not a projection or a simulation. She is somehow accessing real memories from 3 million years ago." The vision faded and everyone found themselves back in the courtroom. But something had changed. The way the alien beings looked at the human delegation was different now, filled with a mixture of fear, respect, and something that might have been reverence. Katie swayed on her feet, clearly exhausted by what she had just done when she spoke. Again, her voice was that of a tired 12-year-old girl, but her words carried implications that terrified everyone who heard them. The genetic triggers built into human DNA are activating now because the threat the Shapers foresaw is almost here, she said. "My precognitive abilities are just the beginning. As humanity spreads across the galaxy and faces new challenges, more of their dormant capabilities will emerge. Some humans will develop the ability to manipulate matter at the quantum level. Others will learn to bend space and time. Eventually, some will remember how to guide evolution itself." Prosecutor Veltar-S. crystal body had gone completely transparent with shock. "You are saying that humans will become like the ancient Shapers again." "I am saying that humans never stopped being Shapers," Katie replied. They just forgot what they were, but forgetting and remembering are both temporary states. The real question is whether the galaxy is ready to accept the return of its former rulers, or whether you will try to destroy them before they can fully awaken. Judge Kethver leaned forward in his floating chair, all four of his arms gripping the armrests tightly. Child, if what you have shown us is true, then humanity possesses the potential to become the most powerful force in the galaxy. How do we know that you will use that power wisely? How do we know that you will not become the same threat that you claim to be preparing to face? Katie smiled sadly. You do not know, honored judge. That is the choice you must make based on faith, rather than evidence, but I can tell you this much. The threat that is coming will destroy every species in the galaxy if humanity is not ready to face it. The Shapers saw this future clearly, and they sacrificed everything they were to ensure that their descendants would be strong enough to protect the civilization they had created. She gestured around the courtroom. Every being here, every species represented, every world that has achieved intelligence in spaceflight exists because the Shapers planned it that way. They created you not as servants, but as partners for their descendants. The question now is whether you will accept that partnership, or whether you will try to prevent humanity from becoming what they need to become to save everyone. The courtroom fell silent again as the judges considered what they had learned. The trial that had begun as a simple matter of determining whether humans were too dangerous to be allowed into galactic society had become something much more complex and frightening. They were no longer judging humanity's past actions, but deciding the future of every intelligent species in the galaxy. Judge Kethver looked at Katie with eyes that held 3 centuries of wisdom and experience. What you ask of us is not easy. Child, you want us to trust a species that we barely understand based on claims. The great courtroom remained silent for what felt like hours, though only minutes had passed since Katie finished speaking. Judge Kethver sat motionless in his floating chair, his compound eyes reflecting the starlight that streamed through the transparent walls. Around him, the other judges seemed frozen in contemplation of what they had learned. The revelation that their entire civilization had been planned and guided by an ancient race was difficult enough to accept, but the knowledge that humanity were the descendants of those same beings was almost impossible to process. Finally, Judge Kethver stirred. His 4 arms moved slowly as he activated the holographic controls that floated around his chair. The court will recess for deliberation, he announced, his voice carrying the formal authority of his position. All representatives will remain in their assigned areas while the judicial panel considers the evidence that has been presented. As the judges withdrew to their private chamber, Katie Brooks collapsed into a nearby chair. The effort of accessing and sharing ancient memories had drained her completely, and she looked like what she really was, a 12-year-old girl who had just carried the weight of galactic civilization on her shoulders. Commander Jake Murphy moved quickly to her side, offering her water and making sure she was not seriously hurt. How did you do that? Jake asked quietly. Those visions, the memories from millions of years ago, how is any of that possible? Katie looked up at him with tired eyes. It is hard to explain in words that normal humans can understand, she said. The abilities that are awakening in me are not really telepathy or precognition like I told the judges. They are something much more complex. I can see the connections between all things, the threads of cause and effect that link past and future. When I touch someone's mind, I am not reading their thoughts. I am following those threads to see where they lead. Dr. Rodriguez had been monitoring Katie with his scanners throughout the trial, and now he looked up from his readings with amazement and concern. Her brain activity is still completely normal, he reported to Jake. Whatever she is doing, it is not showing up on any of our instruments. It is as if she is accessing information through channels that our science cannot detect. Across the courtroom, the alien delegates were having heated discussions in their own languages. The Vexi representatives were flashing bright colors as they argued among themselves, while the mechanical beings of the Construct Collective were communicating in rapid bursts of electronic signals. Even the normally peaceful luminals were pulsing with agitated light as they tried to understand what they had witnessed. Prosecutor Veltar approached the human section, his crystal body dim and flickering. "If what the child says is true," he said to Jake, "then this trial was never really about justice. It was about fear. My people have been afraid of humanity since you first appeared in our space, but we could never understand why. Now I know. Some part of us remembers serving the Shapers, and we are terrified of their return." Jake studied the alien prosecutor with new understanding. So the Coalition's plan to invade Earth, that was never really about resources or territory. No, Veltar admitted. It was about preventing the awakening that we all sensed was coming. We thought that if we could destroy humanity before you fully developed your abilities, we could remain free. But now I see that we were only hastening the very thing we feared. Katie looked up from her chair, her young face showing wisdom far beyond her years. The Shapers designed their servant. Species with built-in ability programming, she said softly. Not mind control or slavery, but a deep genetic predisposition to follow and protect their creators. As humanity awakens, that programming is beginning to activate in all of you. You will find it increasingly difficult to act against human interests. Not because you are forced to, but because it feels wrong at a fundamental level. The implications of this revelation sent new waves of shock through the assembled delegates. The idea that their own genetics might compel them to serve humanity was even more disturbing than the knowledge of their artificial origins. Hours passed before the judges returned to the courtroom. When they finally emerged from their private chamber, Judge Kethver looked like he had aged decades in the time they had been gone. His metallic skin had taken on a dull, worn appearance, and his movements seemed slower and more deliberate than before. "The judicial panel has reached a decision," he announced, his voice carrying across the vast spherical chamber. "But before we render judgment, I must share with this court the full truth about humanity's origins, as revealed in the classified archives that only the highest-ranking officials are permitted to access." He gestured, and new holographic displays appeared above the platform. These were not visions like Katie had shared, but actual archaeological reports and genetic analysis data from dozens of worlds. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Ruins found on ancient worlds contained technology that matched human genetic markers. Mathematical equations carved in stone predicted human expansion patterns with perfect accuracy. Most disturbing of all, star charts found in the deepest archaeological sites showed the current positions of human colonies with precision that should have been impossible for beings who lived millions of years before space travel was invented. The evidence confirms what the child has told us, Judge Kethver said. Humanity are indeed the descendants of the beings we call the Shapers. Their genetic code contains sequences that can only be artificial, designed to activate under specific conditions. The rapid development of human technology, their expansion into space, even their capacity for both creation and destruction all follow patterns predicted in documents that predate their civilization by eons. He paused, looking directly at Katie. More importantly, the archives contain warnings about a threat that approaches from beyond our galaxy. Something that the Shapers called the Devourers. Entities of pure entropy that consume entire star systems and leave nothing but void behind them. According to their calculations, this threat will reach our galaxy within the next 500 years. The courtroom erupted into chaos as beings from every species began shouting questions and demands. But Judge Kethver raised all four hands for silence. And when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of ultimate authority. The judicial panel has considered all evidence, both old and new, he said. We have weighed the dangers of allowing humanity to develop their full potential against the greater danger of facing the coming threat without them. Our judgment is as follows. The great judge stood up from his floating chair, a gesture that carried deep significance in Zephyrian culture. Humanity will be granted full membership in the Galactic Confederation, with all rights and privileges that such membership entails. However, this membership comes with conditions. Katie Brooks will serve as humanity's primary representative and monitor, reporting directly to this court on the progress of human development. Any human who manifests abilities beyond current understanding will be registered and monitored to ensure that their powers are used responsibly. Katie stood up slowly, her small frame somehow commanding attention from beings 10 times her size. "I accept these terms on behalf of my species," she said formally. "But I must warn you all that what comes next will test every alliance and challenge every assumption you have about power and responsibility." Judge Kethver nodded solemnly. "We understand, child. But we also understand that the alternative is extinction for every species in this galaxy. If humanity must become gods again to save us all, then we will help them remember how to be merciful ones." As the formal proceedings concluded and the various delegations began to disperse, Katie approached Judge Kethver privately, the ancient. Judge looked down at the small human girl who had changed the course of galactic history in a single day. "There is something else you want to tell me," he said, though it was not really a question. Katie smiled sadly. "Yes, honored Judge. I chose this timeline specifically because it was the only one where both humanity and the galaxy survived what is coming. But that does not mean the path ahead will be easy. The awakening process cannot be stopped now, and some humans will develop abilities that even the ancient shapers feared to use. When that happens, you will need to trust that the same wisdom that guided them to sacrifice everything for the future will guide their descendants to use their power responsibly." Judge Kethver's mandibles clicked slowly as he considered her words. And if that wisdom fails? If humanity becomes drunk on power and forgets their purpose? Katie's expression grew infinitely sad as she looked up at him. "Then the Devourers will be the least of our problems, honored Judge. But I have seen the hearts of my people, and I believe they will remember what they are fighting for when the time comes. The Shapers chose to sleep in humanity's form for a reason. They knew that only by experiencing struggle and loss and mortality could they develop the compassion necessary to wield ultimate power without becoming monsters." As Katie walked away to join her fellow humans, Judge Kethver remained on the platform, staring out at the stars beyond the transparent walls. Somewhere in that vast darkness, an ancient enemy was approaching, and the galaxy's only hope lay in the awakening of beings who had once ruled it as gods. The trial was over,